Hey, welcome EKU Libraries followers. My name is Kelly Smith. Welcome to our first Focus on Scholarship Facebook Live video. Today I am talking with Dr. Mike Austin, Professor of Philosophy at EKU since 2004. He's a prolific scholar. He's written numerous books on a variety of issues related to philosophy, including character development through sports, ethics and parenting, and Christian virtue. And he has a new book coming out in December, on the virtue of humility. So, Dr. Austin, would you like to tell us a little bit about your new book?
Yeah, you bet. It's one of my books that's aimed at other scholars, so it's primarily that's the target of the book, trying to engage in that conversation. And it's about the virtue of humility from a Christian virtue of humility. So I look at some of the philosophical arguments people have given about humility in general, try to formulate a conception of humility that I think is true to primarily New Testament picture of what that virtue is. And one major sort of point I make in the book is that humility is not so much about how we view ourselves, although that's part of it, but at least from a sort of classical Christian perspective, it's primarily a relational virtue. So it's about putting the interests of others ahead of our own and using wisdom to know how and when to do that. And then I try to take that and apply it to some of these issues like that I've written about in other books. So how humility might work in the family and sports, how it addresses issues related to religious pluralism, how it can be a virtue for the oppressed, because there's some controversy about that. And so the way I think of humility, it can foster or be conducive to human flourishing. And so I try to spell that out in more detail in the book.
That's great. So have you, how did you decide to write about this particular topic?
Yeah, it was probably 10 years ago. I was reading a book, and there's just a small section about humility, and I disagreed with what the author said about what humility is. So, that's what motivates you often in philosophy. It's like, well, I think people are wrong about this, but I'm not sure what I think, so I'm going to figure it out. So I started just writing a few papers, and then got more interested in it, and then it developed into a book project. So been working on it off and on over 10 years, but so it's satisfying to have it actually be done and have a book coming out.
Do you think things happening in the world right now in the way things are just in general, did that play a role?
Yeah, not at that time, but I can see it being relevant. I think the past few years, and even some of these like issues I think about and talk about in more sort of public settings like social media and dialogue between like interreligious and political dialogue. I mean, a dose of humility would be nice, because humility presupposes some other good thing that we're concerned about. So if it's, for the Christian perspective, ultimately it's about union with God and loving other people, but other religions and other, even just non-religious people, there's certain aspects of humility, even that understood in a Christian way, that those people can exemplify and practice. So it's a pluralistic view. And so I guess I bring that up because, it's relevant. No matter what your views, that virtue is relevant. And it's especially relevant as we try to navigate all of our differences.
And maybe people can find some more common ground if they come to discussions with a place of humility.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is what I say in my classes, and I think it's true in society. The metaphor is, instead of like this face-to-face argument where we're squaring off against each other, if it was more side by side, trying to figure out what's true and what's good together. I mean, it's an ideal, but it's worth striving for. So humility has that posture where there's cooperation and trying to seek this greater good, whether it's truth or the best political policy in a certain realm, or just living a good human life.
That's really cool. So you mentioned that, so this book is focused more on a conversation with other scholars like yourselves. A lot of your books have been more towards a general audience. I want to read a quote from your Amazon page, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So most of my books are intended to make philosophy accessible to a wide audience. I think at its best, philosophical thought can be applied in ways that lead to a wise, good, beautiful, and well-lived life. The result is a life with meaning and purpose that also ends up being deeply satisfying. And I think that is a really interesting way of approaching talking about your field and educating about what you do for a wider audience. So how has that been receptive? Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I think I get more feedback from people, obviously, from those kind of books because there are more people that read them than just the other scholars in the field. But yeah, for me, that philosophy has always been, at the end of the day, it should be practical in that sense, right? It should be useful to just normal people, right?
Yeah,
non-scholars,
right,
for
exactly.
lack of a better way to put it. And you think about the history of philosophy, whether it's Socrates walking around Athens, bothering people, but trying to, out of his concern for the common good and his community and those things, he was willing to engage people and tried to engage the person on the street, not just other, philosophers alone. And really until, I would argue, about the 20th century, philosophers wrote books intended for a wider audience and other academics and just other people who were interested. So in the past century, it's become much more technical and much more, just the way it's set up, it's more limited in who can access it, which I think there's good things about that. But for me, then what I want to do is take some of that stuff, my own work or the work of others, and sort of translate it, because there's things that are really useful. So I can tell a student or someone I've just given a talk to about the connection between character and happiness, and they'll feel like it's a revolutionary thought.
Got it.
Whereas for a lot of philosophers, well, yeah, that's what Aristotle said, and
Sure.
it's controversial. People argue, but you kind of forget when you're in your own little world, there are ideas there that can benefit people, and so that's part of my motivation, is to help people see that philosophy is not just, it's actually one of the most relevant things to life.
Yeah. All right. Very cool. Okay, well, thank you so much. So whether you are a scholar or a student or a regular person, check out Dr. Austin's books. We've put links to resources related to his stuff in the comments below on Facebook Live. And if you have any other questions that come up after this, feel free to type them in, and maybe we could do a little follow up through the comments in this video. So thanks very much.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep.